came through the sort of sacramental preparation doorway. Others came because of that intimacy and relationship that we had with the school department. And so in speaking to those parishes, we devised, and they each came up with their own sort of poster as to when it would happen, who would be targeted to, and where the location was. So we negotiated all of that. And so of the 3 or 4 or 5 sessions that we ran, this was sort of how we did it. The initial session was unpacking some of that content of home as a holy place. So we started off by affirming those that came, talking about the everyday holiness of their own lives, and recognising that all of those things were part and parcel of their lived faith in their homes and in their work communities as well. We also started to look at their own faith journey. So the second session was about looking at our own faith journeys, and I love that picture. I pinched it off the internet, off the tube out of the underground a couple of years ago. And we started to look at some of the things in our faith lives that had formed us, been really influential. Maybe it was a person. Maybe it was an event they went to. And what we did is we went round the Monopoly board. And actually all of these things are on the Monopoly board. Was it something that we'd heard at Mass? Was it something that we'd read in a book somewhere? Was it something understood in a quiet moment in the open air? Was it the experience of a person, or maybe a big event? And we started to realise that what had formed us, we were wondering, was that going to form our own children? So, for example, one chap said, as a boy, he'd been involved in the music group. It was really, really influential in his faith life. And that's what he wanted for his son. He wanted his son to be involved in the music group of the parish. His son was a musical. And so there was this realisation that actually what had worked for us and we thought would work for our children might not be the case. And so we started to unpack that sense of what did we think was going to work in this passing on of faith. And we started to look at the aspirations, our own aspirations that we held for our children. And for this, I gave them a little exercise. I gave them an envelope. And in the envelope were these 8 statements. I'll read them to you. Okay. I would like to see my child attend Mass regularly. They would be involved in parish ministry, possibly serve on the altar, and maybe sing in the choir. They would have an understanding of the elements of the liturgy. Next statement was, I would like my child to have a sense of the divine, recognise beauty in creation, and see God in their everyday encounters. Next statement, I would like my child to know that they are loved by God. I would like my child to have a personal relationship with Jesus and have a sense of the Spirit within their lives. I would like my child to understand what makes them Catholic. I would like them to be familiar with the Catechism and have a sense of Catholic identity. They would know some of the teaching of the Catholic Church and would aspire to adhere to it. Sentence number 5. I would like my child to talk about faith matters freely and feel that they can ask questions openly and safely. I would like my child to have respect for others and to understand they are part of a bigger picture. I would hope that they would respond with justice and compassion to the needs of others. I'd be delighted if they were to be involved in some sort of charity work. I would like my child to feel part of a worshipping community, come to Mass, welcomed at Mass on Sunday. I would hope that those that they meet at Mass feel like a second family. And finally, I would like my child to pray regularly, read and engage with Scripture, and find a forum in which they might share faith and pray with their peers. So those 8 statements were in an envelope. Okay. And I gave them to them and we had a conversation about them, and yes, all 8, we were happy with all of the 8 of those statements. But then I said to them, okay, I want you to order them. I want you to put the one that you think is most important at the top and then order them. We had a round. No, we didn't. We started to do that. And there was some agreement. There was at times some very strong disagreement. However, it started a whole conversation with us about actually what was all this about. And it was, most of the time, we did agree with a top one, which was quite nice. And it was the one about the relationship with Jesus, just so you know. Okay. And so that was a really fruitful exercise in itself, saying, well, actually, what is all this about, and how are we going to maybe go about doing these sorts of things? And so it started to sort of then move formally into this idea of passing on faith. And And we started to think about how did we sort of understand our success in passing on faith? And we started to talk about our children and our families. And I talked them through mine, and I sort of said, well, you know, this one, she goes to Mass regularly, engages with the sermon. You know, have I passed on faith? Ooh, tick VG. Yes, probably I have. This one will only go to church if she's allowed to go to Surf Life Saving afterwards. It's a battle. But recognising God in the divine, recognising the divine as a beauty, all that sort of stuff, ooh, big time, okay? Mm-hmm. This one, she goes to Mass because her friends are in children's liturgy, and she helps with her little friend in children's liturgy. This one goes to Mass because he likes to see the biscuits of his friends. Okay? So they all go to Mass, and then I realised that actually their attendance at Mass was what I was judging my success on. So in a sense, I put that statement at the top. That was the statement which was judging our success in passing on faith. And yet this statement was way down on a lot of our lists. And yet somehow that was the one by which we were judging how well we were passing on faith. So that was a fruitful conversation, and you know, how are we going to do that? So those were our sort of aspirations for our children. And we talked about church teaching and how actually at the heart of catechesis is the person of Jesus Christ. And so we started to then look at Jesus in the scriptures. And we looked at the points at which Jesus commented on faith, thinking if anybody knows about faith, he should. And he speaks about the 4 friends dropping their friends through the roof. Now, one lady who said, my 4 children don't come to Mass, and she was weeping, saying, you know, I'm really distressed, they don't ever come to Mass. And I did ask her, I said, well, could you imagine any one of the 4 being these ones up here? And she went, oh yeah, that's Mark, that's David, that's Sue. She could see that. And she wept again, because actually she was relieved. Because Jesus commented on their faith. He speaks about the centurion in superlatives, not in all Judea have I seen faith such as this. And we asked about, you know, when did we bow to authority? We spoke about the woman who came to Jesus' feet and wept silently, seeking forgiveness. And when do our own family members sometimes come wordlessly after having a right bust up, say nothing, but from their tears or other signs we know that they are sorry. Or the woman who's pushed through the crowd to touch his head, and Jesus comments on her faith. And when are we countercultural? When do we do things actually our culture would say, oh, no, 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 but we do it for the right reasons? And actually, the woman whose daughter needs healing, but she is a Syrophoenician, not of Jesus' kind, and Jesus is not going to help her. But she sort of nags him, saying even the dogs will eat the crumbs from the table. And so Jesus heals her daughter and sort of in a sense nags him. And when do we nag in the cause of justice to get things done? So we spoke about all of these things and what it is to have faith, and looking at those gospel characters. How do we in our ordinary lives exhibit similar behaviour, exhibit similar faith? And that's a whole conversation. So what I'm here doing is I'm giving you snippets of what we've been doing. Okay? These are the sorts of things that we look at. We also, I'm not going to show you this because I haven't got time. John is our director at schools, and we work within the same team, David, John and the others. And he says this, he says the Catholic faith refers to a set of propositions, a way of living, which of course we very much explored in our previous gatherings, an attitude of mind and heart and faith, and we started to understand that with looking at the scripture. And it was also a way of seeking. And so in a sense, this was going to feed into our way of seeking how we pass on faith. And he says this. So I gave this to them, we talked this one through. He said, revelation is given to us by way of scripture, in other words, the Bible tells us. It's also given to us by way of the tradition, in other words, the church teaches us. It's also given to us by way of our own reason. I think this. And it's also given to us by way of our personal experience. I feel this is the sort of way it should be. And we started to talk about, you know, where did we sit in this matrix? You know, I realise that I'm somewhere between these two and rarely go north to west to east to west. And somebody say, well, I'm really, really over here. And we started to talk about where we were in all of that. And recognise that actually I might be here, but somebody else might be over here. And how do we cope with that sort of thing? And we also spoke about the problems of this, in that if we concentrate far too much on Scripture, no such thing as concentrating far too much on Scripture, but if we didn't get a balance, then we might be prone to liberalism or maybe literalism. I am rushing this, sorry. if we concentrated too much on reason, then we might be prone to relativism and fundamentalism. Again, emotionalism and superficiality, the greens and the negatives, if you like, stagnation and passivity. And so those were the problems if we loitered too long in one corner, if you like. And so we realised that actually the best thing here was to maybe try and strike a balance between the four. And so we gave them that sense of a nice bit of rigour, if you like. So that whole way of seeking, of understanding, of using that balance of reason and feeling and tradition and scripture, in a sense, this picture sort of sums that up. And a lovely picture by Caravaggio, which has been given a modern version of it, in that we are still doubting, but still seeking and looking for a way forward. And then we started to do the task, and this is the task that Elizabeth explained to you, spoke to you about earlier, where we did get catechists together, parents together, teachers together, and start asking how they understood their different roles. So that task was set in the middle of this whole catechetical experience, if you like. And you might say that because it was set in the middle of that, it informed the outcome of this. Which, and that might be a good thing, it might be a bad thing. But I wasn't prepared just to give them the job. I wanted to give them something broader, something richer. So that's what we did at that point. And there was some, I would say that we could, in the room, we could get some sort of agreement as to maybe that was your role, and that was your role, and that was your role. Then you go to another parish and they think something completely different. So across the parishes, there was little sense of, this is what it should be like, and blah, 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 blah. However, they all did think that actually I knew what the answer was, and I was about to give it to them. And when I sort of disabused them of that fact, they were then, oh, okay, so it's up to us, and it was up to them about that way of seeking, that way of looking. They still had to poke and look and see how it was going to be. It might be painful. So, looking at all of this then, we then realised that actually our efforts were a bit muddled, a bit fragmented, sometimes a bit messy, and certainly there was a bit of chaos and imperfection about what we were doing. And at times we got a bit low, but I found this clip for them, and I said, look, what you're doing is a little bit like this chap here. I'm going to show him to you, we've got to finish in a second. You'll recognise the song, okay? But done with a passion and an enthusiasm, and done with joy, it is life-giving. So that is a metaphor for us in trying, in our efforts to pass on faith. We do it, if we do it with joy and if we do it with some sense of integrity, it will be imperfect. It will be imperfect. But if it's done with passion, there will be a life-givingness to it and a joy to it. And I match that with these words from Richard Rule. Being human means to be imperfect, to be limited, and thus to change and travel on a perpetual journey. Mature spirituality gives us the ability to live joyfully in an imperfect world. It is important because an imperfect world is the only one we have. And if God does not love imperfect people, God has no one to love. And we always, at the end of the session, have a prayerful reflection. And I introduce them to all sorts of gestures and way of sort of praying. And sometimes they're a bit twitchy about it, but mostly they're good about it. And we give them some ideas to maybe take home with their own families and grandchildren. So that's sort of Plymouth. I realise I've done that 3 times. I've probably missed out stuff because I think I'm sure I've said that, but I maybe haven't. Sometimes I had a room full as big as this. Sometimes I just had a dozen, maybe 8. At one time we only had one. And that's just one of the sessions, and they came back the next week. But we just carried on. You know, one's one. We ran them in the evenings at times. One community wanted it in the afternoon, so both didn't work. And then we ran it again in the evening for those that did work. And we had a room for each time for that. That was great. That shows the benefit of having a good pastoral assistant. I've told you about the sort of common themes through it. Any questions?
Well, I just mentioned that